You think the worst thing that could happen in a horror movie is dying, but these characters unfortunately found out there's something way worse: not dying. Because some fates are just worse than death. Starting off, our first fate comes from House of Wax, where Wade discovers that some art projects really should come with a warning label. So Wade's having what you might call a rough vacation. He ends up in this creepy town with a wax museum, which should have been red flag number 1. But Wade's not exactly the cautious type. The local psychopaths decide he'd make a great addition to their collection, not as a visitor, as an exhibit. Flapjack is also a psychopath, and he says it's kind of messed up. If you don't like this video, subscribe. Don't make my dog sad, come on. But here's where things get interesting. They don't just kill Wade and then coat him in wax. No, that would be too simple. Instead, they paralyze him and pour boiling wax all over his body while he's completely awake. Wade gets to feel every drop of that molten wax covering his skin, sealing him inside what's basically a human-shaped candle. But wait, it gets better. Wade doesn't die from this. The wax hardens around him, and now he's stuck inside this shell, completely unable to move. He can't speak, can't gesture, can't even blink properly. He's just there, sitting in a museum, pretending to be a statue, while tourists probably walk by and complain about the weird smell. The real kicker comes when his friend finds him. You'd think this is where the story gets better, right? Wrong. His buddy tries to help by peeling off the wax from Wade's face. Seems reasonable, except the wax has basically fused with Wade's skin, so when it comes off, his actual face comes with it. Wade gets to experience someone accidentally removing parts of his head while he's fully conscious and can't even scream about it. Think about this for a second. You're trapped inside your own body, can't move, and the one person trying to save you is accidentally making things worse. Wade's probably thinking, dude, just let me die already. But nope, he still has to sit there and endure his friend peeling him apart like he's a Christmas orange or something. Death would have been quick with maybe a few seconds of pain, then nothing. But Wade gets to be a living decoration, probably for hours, maybe days, just waiting and hoping someone will find him. And when they finally do, the rescue attempt turns into accidental torture. Wade basically got turned into the world's most horrifying mannequin, except mannequins don't have to feel their face getting ripped off. Or do they? Do mannequins have feelings? Is me touching the butt of the mannequin bad? Like, am I doing something wrong there? Are they gonna get mad at me for doing shit? But being trapped as living art is nothing compared to eternal suffering. Frank Cotton thought he was pretty smart when he got his hands on that puzzle box in Hellraiser. This guy spent his whole life chasing bigger thrills. Regular stuff wasn't doing it for him anymore. So when Frank finds this weird cube covered in symbols, he figures it's exactly what he needs. Some kind of key to ultimate experiences. And he's right. Just not in the way he hoped for. See, Frank solves the puzzle, and suddenly his room fills with chains that have hooks on the end. These chains don't just grab him, they tear him apart. We're talking about getting ripped into pieces while you're still awake for the whole thing. The chains pull him in different directions until there's not much left of Frank except blood on the floor, and yeah, it sucks. But here's the thing, Frank doesn't die. The creatures behind those chains, they call themselves Cenobites, or basically what like 50-year-old married people start doing when their marriage gets stale. Well, they drag what's left of him to their dimension. And their dimension is basically a place where pain and pleasure got mixed up in the worst possible way. Frank gets to spend eternity being their plaything. Yeah, the parallel to 50-year-old couples where the love has died, it's really apparent, which is kind of gross. RIP if you have parents that are 50 or above. Don't think about that. Don't think about that. Now, you might think that's where the story ends. Frank's stuck in hell. Serves him right for messing with weird boxes. But no, Frank actually manages to escape through some gross stuff involving his brother's blood. Frank comes back to our world, and he's not looking great. He's more muscle and bone than skin, but he's back. And does Frank learn his lesson? Does he think, wow, that was awful, I should probably stay away from demon torture? Of course not. Frank tries to get his old life back by stealing bodies and blood from other people. He's basically become a serial killer just to maintain his gross zombie existence. And surprise, surprise, the Cenobites track him down. And they're not happy that their favorite torture victim escaped without asking permission. So they show up, grab Frank with their chains again, and this time he knows exactly what's coming. Frank gets torn apart again, piece by piece, while he's fully aware it's happening. Right before the chains finish him off, Frank looks at the camera and says,
Jesus wept.
Which is probably not what Jesus had in mind when he was doing that, but sure, Frank, very dramatic. The worst part isn't even the torture here. It's that Frank will probably get put back together just so the Cenobites can tear him apart again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, forever. Frank wanted the ultimate experience. Turns out the ultimate experience is having your worst day on repeat for eternity for some weird twisted guy's kink or something. Honestly, the amount of leather and like makeup they wear, this movie is, I want to look at the director's search history. I know my search history is bad, but what was that guy on? So speaking of things that never end, some fates connect you to others permanently. Which brings us to our next movie, The Human Centipede. Because some people shouldn't really be allowed to have medical degrees or a license to be a film director, if that's a thing, but it should be because we have movies like this. Why have I watched all 3 of them? Lord knows. Dr. Hyder has what he thinks is a brilliant idea for an experiment. He's going to create a human centipede by sewing 3 people together, mouth to rear end, to make one long digestive system. And somehow, this guy convinced himself this was science and not just being a complete psychopath. Lindsay draws the short straw and gets stuck in the middle position. So she's got someone's ass sewn to her mouth, and her butt is sewn to someone else's mouth. The whole setup is exactly as horrible as it sounds. She can't move independently, she can't speak properly, and has to deal with whatever's happening at both ends of this nightmare. Ugh. The doctor keeps them alive on purpose because that's the whole point of his twisted experiment. Lindsay has to crawl around on her hands and knees, permanently attached to 2 other people, while this maniac takes notes and acts proud of his work. He treats like the 3 of them, I guess the one of them, as if it's a dog. I don't know. But then things get worse, because of course they do. The guy at the front of the centipede ends up dying first, and Lindsay can feel him getting cold and stiff, but she's still sewn to him, and she can't get away from the dead body that's attached to her face. Then the person behind her dies too. So now Lindsay is trapped in the middle of 2 corpses. She's the only one left alive in this horrible chain, but she can't free herself. The stitching is too strong, and she doesn't have all the tools to cut herself loose. And then eventually they pull themselves loose, and it's really gross and graphic, and I can't show it on YouTube, but yeah. It's a gross movie. It's disgusting. One time I talked about this movie on this channel, and I still remember one comment. I said there's nothing worse than being in the middle of the human centipede. Someone had the audacity to say, you know what? I wouldn't mind being in the middle of the human centipede if I had a big goth mommy in front of me. Every single day, I feel pain, and I wonder if our generation is cooked. That comment proves it. Anyways, the doctor thought he was creating life. Instead, he created a situation where being the survivor is the worst possible outcome, because you gotta deal with the trauma of that and goth mommies. But at least Lindsay knew her nightmare was man-made, unlike our next victim. Because science experiments don't always go according to plan. In The Fly, Seth Brundle builds a teleportation machine that actually works, which is pretty impressive for a guy working out of his apartment. He can step into one pod and instantly appear in another pod across the room. Revolutionary stuff. Unfortunately, Seth decides to test it on himself without checking if anything else wandered into the machine first. Turns out, a common housefly was hanging out in there. No big deal, right? Wrong. The computer doesn't know the difference between Seth and the fly, so it decides to merge their DNA together. And Seth thinks the experiment worked perfectly because he comes out the other side feeling amazing. More energy, better reflexes, improved everything. He's basically superhuman now. For about a week, Seth thinks he's upgraded himself. He can do pull-ups like never before, his stamina is through the roof, and he's got the confidence he never had.
Don't you feel elevated?
Seth's convinced he's the future of human evolution. His girlfriend, Veronica, is less excited, especially when she notices weird changes. Seth starts losing his fingernails. Then his teeth fall out. His skin develops these gross bumps and lesions that keep getting worse, and he begins throwing up on his food before eating it, which is exactly as disgusting as it sounds. Seth's body is slowly turning into something that's part human, part insect, and the worst part isn't even the physical changes. Seth stays aware the entire time. He watches himself become a monster and can't do anything to stop it. He names his new form Brundlefly because apparently he still has a sense of humor about the whole thing, but you can see in his eyes that he knows he's losing the battle against the fly DNA. Seth tries to reverse this process by using the machine again. His plan is to merge with Veronica and their unborn baby to dilute the fly genes. Veronica, understandably, is not interested in becoming part of Seth's science experiment. She's already watched the man she loves turn into something unrecognizable. And she's kissed him, and well, he's like a fly, and that's a disturbing thought to think about. Can you imagine making out with a fly? Yeah, have fun with those dreams. By the end, Seth can barely speak. He's this grotesque creature that's more fly than human. And when he looks at Veronica, you can see there's still some of the old Seth in there, trapped inside this nightmare body he can't control. Seth then guides Veronica's hand to point a shotgun at his head. Can't ask her to kill him with words anymore, but he doesn't need to. Even as this monster, Seth still loves her enough to spare her from watching him suffer any longer. Seth got exactly what he wanted, a transformation. It's not the kind he was hoping for, which is pretty heartbreaking because his soulmate and lover ends up blowing his top off like it's a fortnight. Quick deaths seem merciful compared, but unfortunately quick deaths seem merciful compared to year-long torture sessions. Because in 7, John Doe really commits to his projects. When this serial killer decides someone represents the sin of sloth, he doesn't just kill them and move on. That would be too simple for a guy who thinks murder is performance art. Instead, John Doe finds Victor Allen, a drug dealer who's also, a very bad person who does bad things that involve very young people, if you catch my drift, and YouTube guidelines don't want to ban me. Anyways, he decides Victor needs to experience sloth in the most literal way possible. So John Doe straps Victor to a bed in his own apartment and just leaves him there for an entire year. 365 days of lying in the same spot, unable to move, slowly wasting away while being kept just alive enough to suffer through every single day of it. John Doe sets up an IV drip to keep Victor from dying of dehydration. Not out of kindness, obviously. He wants Victor to last the full year because apparently this psychopath has a very specific timeline for his murders.
It's dated exactly 1 year ago today.
Victor gets to experience every day of his body breaking down while being conscious for most of it. The room fills with air fresheners, dozens of them, because even serial killers don't want to smell a person rotting for 12 months. John Doe is thoughtful that way. He documents the whole process with Polaroid photos, taking pictures of Victor's decline day after day. It's like the most disturbing time-lapse project you'll ever see. Victor's condition gets worse and worse. His skin develops sores that never heal, he loses weight until he's basically a skeleton covered in flesh, and then at some point he chews off his own tongue, probably trying to end things faster, or maybe just from the pain of everything else. When detectives Somerset and Mills finally find Victor, they think he's been dead for months. The guy looks mummified. His body is so deteriorated that seasoned cops start throwing up at the sight of him. Everyone assumes they're looking at a corpse until Victor suddenly gasps for air and scares the hell out of everyone in the room. Victor survived John Doe's year-long experiment, but barely. The doctors say his brain is basically mush from the trauma and malnutrition. He's declared brain dead even though his body is still technically functioning. Victor dies shortly after being found, but only after enduring 365 days of the slowest, most disgusting torture imaginable. Most of John Doe's other victims got killed quickly. The gluttony guy force-fed until his stomach burst, probably took a couple hours. The greed lawyer bled to death after cutting off his own flesh, so maybe an hour of suffering. But Victor got an entire year. Every single day was worse than the last, and he was awake for most of it, ending in his mind being the same as a 7-year-old child in 2025, completely brain dead. But at least John Doe had the decency to work alone. Because apparently if you piss off old ladies and drag me to hell, their customer service complaint is going to be very bad and have eternal consequences for you. Because Christine works at a bank and has to deny an old gypsy woman's request for a mortgage extension. She's just doing her job, following company policy. It's nothing personal. The gypsy woman doesn't see it that way though. She puts a curse on Christine that's supposed to drag her soul to hell in 3 days. Christine probably figured this was just an angry customer being dramatic. Christine spends those 3 days trying everything to break the curse. She visits psychics, performs ritual sacrifices with her pet cat, and even attempts to pass the curse to someone else. By day 3, Christine thinks she's figured it out and successfully transferred the curse to its original owner. Problem solved, crisis averted, time to get back to normal life. So Christine and her boyfriend head to the train station for a romantic weekend getaway. She's feeling pretty good about herself. Beat the supernatural curse, saved her own soul, and now she gets a nice trip out of town. Christine's probably thinking this whole experience taught her a valuable lesson about customer service and standing up to weird old ladies that try to curse you. Then Christine checks her pocket and finds the cursed button that's supposed to transfer the curse to whoever has it. Turns out she never actually passed it along. The curse is still active, the 3 days are up, and Christine is standing on a train platform when hell decides to collect its due. The ground underneath the train tracks starts cracking open. Fire shoots up from the cracks and demonic hands burst through the pavement. These aren't like metaphorical hands or special effects hands. They're actual demon hands grabbing Christine's arms and legs, pulling her down towards the flames. Christine tries to fight back, but what's she gonna do against literal demons? She grabs onto the platform edge and looks at her boyfriend with this expression of pure terror. This is the moment she realizes that all of her curse-breaking attempts were useless, and she's about to experience one of the worst fates imaginable. Demonic hand drags Christine down into the fire. Her skin starts burning as she's pulled deeper underground, and Christine is fully conscious during the whole process, feeling the flames and knowing exactly where she's being taken. Her boyfriend can only watch as his girlfriend disappears into a hole in the ground that seals itself up afterwards. Christine thought the curse was just superstition. Turns out the gypsy woman had connections that go way beyond just an angry Yelp review. Christine's last moments are spent burning alive while being dragged to spend eternity in hell, all because she followed bank policy instead of approving a loan extension. By God though, this movie kind of pisses me off because that woman was in a lot of debt. I'm not saying old women in mountains of debt deserve to lose their home. She was in a lot of debt. And then also, like, I don't like this movie. Like, she didn't get dragged to hell until she pulled the button out. It's like the perfect movie moment. I get why they did it, but like, if it was like the real lore of this, it wouldn't happen that way. It wouldn't. The minute no. I don't know. Obviously, I don't want old women to lose their homes in debt. She was in a lot of debt. That was a lot of debt. So yeah, some customers complain to management, which makes you go to hell. But others steal your identity. But when I say identity theft though, usually think about credit cards, not brain surgery. Because in Get Out, the Armitage family runs a very specialized business. They find young black people, hypnotize them into a mental void called the sunken place, then auction off their bodies to rich white people who want a physical upgrade. Yeah, it's human trafficking. It's bad. It's bad. This is a messed up concept. Chris goes to meet his girlfriend's parents and ends up getting the full treatment. The mother, Missy, hypnotizes him using the sound of a spoon stirring in a teacup. It seems harmless enough until Chris finds himself falling into complete darkness while his body stays behind in the real world. The sunken place is exactly what it sounds like. Chris sinks deeper and deeper into this black void while reality gets smaller and smaller above him, until he's looking at the world through what feels like a tiny TV screen floating in space. He can see what his body is doing, but he can't control any of it. Chris becomes a passenger in his own life. While Chris is stuck in this mental prison, the Armitages hold an auction. Rich white people bid on Chris's body like he's a vintage car like they want to restore or something. Or like another metaphor for something that happened a couple hundred years ago that is incredibly bad and what the entire movie is based on. Duh. The winner gets to have their brain transplanted into Chris's head, while Chris's consciousness stays trapped in the sunken place forever. The blind art dealer who wins the auction explains it perfectly. Chris will still be in there, aware of everything happening, but he'll only control a tiny sliver of his own mind. The art dealer gets Chris's eyes and body, while Chris gets to watch his life being lived by someone else. This isn't death. Chris doesn't get the relief of his consciousness ending. Instead, he gets to spend the rest of his natural lifespan as a prisoner inside his own skull, watching a stranger use his hands, walk with his legs, and speak with his voice. Every day for potentially decades, Chris would wake up knowing he exists but can't do anything about it. Other people have already gone through this process. The housekeeper Georgina and the groundskeeper Walter are actually the grandparents' brains inside young bodies. The real Georgina and Walker are still in there somewhere, screaming silently in their own personal sunken places while elderly white people puppet their bodies around. Chris manages to escape before the surgery, but only after experiencing the sunken place firsthand. He knows exactly what fate he almost suffered, being awake but powerless when someone else lives his life and makes his decisions and uses his body for whatever they want. Most horror movie villains kill their victims. The Armitages do something worse. They steal their victims' entire existence while keeping them conscious enough to know what they've lost. At least Chris gets to keep his human form during the ordeal though, because unexpectedly, podcasting comes with some unexpected hazards if you are in Canada and are named Wallace. Yeah, we're talking about Tusk. Wallace travels to Canada to interview weird people for his show. Because if you didn't know it, Canada's full of freaking weird people. I'm Canadian. Any weird person you ever met, they're Canadian. It's just the rules. We're all weird up here. Not nice to each other. Nope, we're just weird. I like to chug maple syrup. We get it. Make your jokes. I've heard them all. Anyways, Wallace finds Howard Howe, an old sailor with stories about being shipwrecked and surviving thanks to a walrus he called Mr. Tusk. It's kind of hinted that he had a romantic relationship with Mr. Tusk, who is a walrus, but yeah. Howard seems harmless enough. He's just another crazy guy with tales to tell. Wallace figures this will make great content for his podcast audience. Howard has different plans. He drugs Wallace's tea and wakes up the next morning to find his leg has been amputated. Howard claims a spider bit Wallace and he had to remove the leg to save his life. Wallace probably suspects this is nonsense, but he's strapped to a wheelchair and can't exactly argue with the guy holding the medical instruments. Howard explains his real project then. He wants to recreate his relationship with Mr. Tusky by turning Wallace into a walrus. Not a costume or makeup, actual surgery. Howard plans to remove Wallace's other leg, sew his arms to his sides, and then stitch him into a suit made from human skin to create a realistic walrus body. It's exactly as gross as it sounds. Wallace goes through this transformation while conscious for most of it. His legs get cut off, his tongue gets removed so he can't speak, and his arms get sewn to his torso until only his forearms can move. He's basically moving around like this forever, which is kind of messed up. Howard then uses the bones from Wallace's legs to carve makeshift tusks that he shoves into Wallace's face. By the end of the surgery, Wallace looks and moves like a walrus. He has to crawl around on his stomach using his forearms like flippers. He can't speak, he can only make walrus-like noises. Howard treats him like a pet, feeding him fish and expecting him to behave like the animal he now resembles. Wallace kills Howard during their final confrontation, using his new tusks to impale the old man. And you'd think this means Wallace can finally get help and maybe reverse some of the damage. But no, too much has been removed and altered. Wallace's transformation is permanent. The movie then jumps ahead 1 year, and Wallace now lives in a wildlife sanctuary because that's the only place that makes sense for him. His girlfriend and his best friend visit him regularly. During one visit, his girlfriend feeds him a fish and tells him she still loves him.
I love you, Wallace.
Wallace starts crying, tears roll down his walrus face while he makes these heartbroken walrus sounds. Those tears prove that Wallace's human mind is still intact inside this walrus body. He understands what happened to him, remembers who he used to be, and knows he'll never be human again. Wallace has to spend the rest of his life as an actual walrus, fully aware of everything he lost. Which is very messed up concept, but what is even more messed up is the fact that his girlfriend is like loving him still. She's having weird walrus thoughts, just like the ship guy that lost his walrus lover. If there was a sequel, I wouldn't even want to know what would happen. So Wallace's torture was physical, but some suffering transcends the body entirely. Because in Martyrs, religious extremists take their research very seriously. This group of people believes you can learn about the afterlife by torturing women until they break through to some higher state of being. They call these women martyrs, not because they die for their beliefs, but because they witness something beyond death while still alive. It's a very disturbing concept. It's a very good movie, but it is very messed up. Anna gets selected as their latest test subject. They beat her, starve her, and break her down psychologically until she stops fighting back. The group has done this to other women before, but most of them just died or went insane before reaching whatever state these lunatics are looking for. Anna is different though. She survives everything they throw at her and somehow pushes past the point where normal people would give up. The group gets excited because Anna might actually be the martyr they've been looking for all of these years. Then comes the final test. They strap Anna down and flay her. Not partially, but completely. They remove every inch of skin from her body while she's awake and conscious. Anna should die from shock, blood loss, or infection within minutes, but instead, she stays alive and enters some kind of trance state. Anna hangs there, skinless and barely breathing, but her eyes are moving and she seems aware of her surroundings. The group is thrilled because this is exactly what they wanted. Someone who survived their torture and apparently reached enlightenment through suffering. The leader, an old woman called Mademoiselle, comes to speak with Anna. Anna can barely whisper, but she manages to tell Mademoiselle something. We never hear what Anna says, but whatever it is has a massive impact. Mademoiselle then goes back to her followers who are waiting to hear about Anna's vision of the afterlife. afterlife. They've spent decades torturing women to get this information, but instead of sharing Anna's revelation, Mademoiselle pulls out a gun and shoots herself in the head. Think about that. This woman dedicated her entire life to learning what happens after death. She finally gets the answer straight from someone who's supposedly seen it firsthand, and her first response is pulling a Fortnite gun on herself. What did Anna tell her? Was the afterlife so wonderful that Mademoiselle couldn't wait to get there? Or was it so horrible that death seemed preferable to living with that knowledge? We'll never know because she took that secret with her. So Anna is left hanging there, skinless and silent, having shared the universe's biggest mystery with the one person who refused to pass it along. Whatever Anna saw pales in comparison next to our final nightmare though, because multi-generational planning can really pay off if you're patient enough. In Hereditary, Peter's grandmother spent decades setting up the perfect conditions for demonic possession. She wasn't just a regular evil grandmother, she was the leader of a cult that worships Payman, one of the 8 kings of hell. Her life's work was getting this demon into a male body from her bloodline, and Peter was always the end goal. Everything that happens to Peter's family follows her plan. His sister Charlie gets possessed first because Payman needs a temporary host while they work on breaking Peter down emotionally. Charlie then dies in a car accident that wasn't really an accident. The cult made sure she'd be in the right place at the right time to get her head knocked off by a telephone pole. Peter blames himself for Charlie's death because he was driving the car when it happened. His guilt eats him alive while his mother Annie slowly loses her mind from grief. The family starts falling apart exactly the way the cult intended. Annie then discovers her mother was leading this demon worship group, but it's too late to do anything about it. The cult has already positioned people around the family. Joan, who befriends Annie at a grief support group, is actually one of the cult members guiding Annie through fake seances that just make everything worse. Peter watches his father get burned alive when Annie tries to destroy Charlie's sketchbook. Then Annie herself gets possessed and chases Peter through the house while making inhuman sounds and crawling on the ceiling. She cuts off her own head with a piano wire right in front of Peter, who's now completely traumatized and broken. That's when Payman makes his move. Peter has been emotionally destroyed by watching his entire family die in horrible ways. He's at his absolute lowest point, which is exactly what the cult needed. Payman can only possess someone who's been worn down enough to be vulnerable. Peter tries to escape by jumping out of the attic window, but even that doesn't work. He crashes to the ground, probably breaking his neck, but Payman's spirit enters his body and heals the damage. Peter stands up, but he's not Peter anymore. The cult members emerge from hiding and carry Peter's body up to Charlie's treehouse, where they've set up a shrine to Payman. They place a crown on his head and worship him as their new demon king. Peter's eyes are open and he's breathing, but Peter isn't home anymore. Payman now has a young, healthy body to inhabit, and Peter's consciousness has been pushed aside or destroyed entirely. Peter gets to be technically alive while a demon uses his face, his voice, and his hands to do whatever it wants for potentially decades. His grandmother's plan worked perfectly. She died happy knowing her grandson would spend the rest of his life as a prisoner in his own body. So there you have it, 10 different people who discovered that sometimes the only thing worse than dying is staying alive. If any of these fates sound appealing to you, please seek professional help immediately because you scare me and you need to talk to somebody. Drop a comment, let me know which one made you want to sleep with the lights on, and don't forget to subscribe for more cheerful content about puppies and kittens and all other sorts of things about horror movies that exist to ruin your day. If you want to watch another one of those videos, well, it's on screen right here. Bye-bye.